She walked into their world wearing a borrowed dress and a practiced smile, introduced as temporary, a stand-in, a prop to clean up the youngest son's reputation while the real heirs carved up an empire worth $800 million. They seated her at the table, poured her water, then turned their backs. They didn't ask her name. They didn't need to. She was furniture. But while they spoke over her head about offshore accounts and zoning boards, about leverage and legacy, she was doing something they would never expect. She was counting. And when the reckoning came, when the regulatory letters arrived, when the wire transfers froze, when the family name that had opened every door in the city suddenly meant liability, they would finally ask the question they should have asked on day one: who is she? By then, it would be far too late. The law office smelled like leather and old money. Mahogany paneling absorbed sound. A clock ticked somewhere behind marble columns. Caroline Grant sat in the reception area with her hands folded in her lap, back straight, legs crossed at the ankle. She wore a navy sheath dress she'd bought on sale 2 years ago and black pumps she'd resoled twice. Her hair was pulled into a low bun, no jewelry except small gold studs. Nothing that would distract. Across from her, a man in a charcoal suit flipped through a folder without looking up. His name was Elliot Cross, and he was the second son of the Cross family, the ones who owned half the commercial district and a quarter of the waterfront, the ones whose name appeared on hospital wings and museum plaques. He had the kind of face that photographers loved: sharp jawline, easy smile, eyes that looked warm in the right light. Right now, those eyes were tired. "You understand the terms?" he asked. Caroline nodded. 6 months, he continued. "Public appearances, family dinners, charity galas. You'll be introduced as my fiancé. You'll smile. You'll be gracious. You won't embarrass me or them. And in return, $50,000, paid in installments, plus wardrobe, travel, and a reference letter if you want one." She considered this. $50,000 was more than she made in a year at the bookstore where she worked mornings, more than the side consulting brought in. It was also, she suspected, far less than what this performance was actually worth to him. "Why me?" she asked. Elliot closed the folder. "Because you're smart enough to play the part and invisible enough that no one will ask questions." The honesty was almost refreshing. "When do we start?" Caroline said. The Cross estate sat behind iron gates on a street where every house looked like a museum. Stone facades, sculpted hedges, fountains that ran even in winter. Caroline arrived in an Uber, carrying a single leather weekend bag. Elliot met her at the door, already in character. He kissed her cheek lightly, his hand resting on her lower back as he guided her inside. The foyer was 3 stories tall. A chandelier hung like a frozen constellation. Marble floors gleamed under her heels. "They're in the study," Elliot murmured. "Just follow my lead." She nodded. The study was smaller than she'd expected, but no less intimidating. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 walls. A fireplace crackled softly. At the center of the room, 4 people sat in high-backed chairs arranged around a glass coffee table. Elliot's father, Richard Cross, sat at the head. Silver-haired, sharp-eyed, wearing a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Caroline's rent. His wife, Diane, sat beside him, blonde and composed, her hands folded over a Hermes clutch. Across from them were Elliot's older brother, James, and his wife, Vanessa. James looked like a campaign poster. Perfect teeth, perfect posture. Vanessa wore pearls and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Everyone," Elliot said. "This is Caroline, my fiancée." Richard looked her up and down, not unkindly, just appraising. "Pleasure," he said. Diane offered a thin smile. "How lovely." James stood and shook her hand. His grip was firm, professional, the kind of handshake that said, "I've already decided what you're worth." Vanessa didn't rise. "Sit, sit," Richard said, gesturing to the sofa. Caroline sat. Elliot sat beside her, his hand finding hers. She let him take it. "So," Richard began, "Elliot tells us you work in publishing." It wasn't a question, but Caroline answered anyway. At a bookstore, part-time. How charming, Diane said. James leaned forward. And you two met? At a gallery opening, Elliot said smoothly. She was there with a friend. I was bored. We started talking about Rothko. Rothko, James repeated, as if the name itself was suspect. I like his use of color, Caroline offered. The way he isolates emotion. Diane's smile tightened. How poetic. Richard cleared his throat. Well, we're glad Elliot's finally settled down. Heaven knows he needed it. Elliot laughed, a little too loud. Thanks, Dad. Drink? Vanessa asked Caroline, her tone making it clear she hoped the answer was no. Water, please, Caroline said. Vanessa rose and walked to the bar cart, pouring sparkling water into a crystal glass. She handed it to Caroline without a word. Richard was already moving on. James, did you talk to the zoning board about the waterfront project? And just like that, Caroline ceased to exist. Dinner was served in the formal dining room at 8 o'clock. Caroline counted 12 place settings, though only 6 people sat at the table. The plates were Limoges. The silverware was so heavy, it felt like a test. Richard sat at the head. Diane to his right. James and Vanessa across from Elliot and Caroline. A woman in a black uniform brought out the first course, seared scallops on a bed of microgreens. Caroline, Diane said, her voice bright and hollow. Elliot mentioned you grew up in the Midwest? Indiana, Caroline said. How quaint. Did you always want to move to the city? I wanted to go where the work was. And you found a bookstore, Vanessa said, her tone suggesting this was somehow tragic. I found several things, Caroline replied evenly. James cut in. Dad, I wanted to circle back on the Riverside LLC. The permits came through, but we're still waiting on environmental clearance. Richard nodded. Push harder. We're already 3 months behind schedule. Environmental can drag for a year if they want to, James said. Then make them not want to. Caroline ate her scallops in silence, watching. Elliot touched her hand. You okay? She nodded. Diane turned to her. Caroline, dear, would you mind helping me with something after dinner? I'm organizing a benefit for the Children's Hospital, and I could use an extra pair of hands. It wasn't a request. Of course, Caroline said. After dinner, Diane led Caroline to a sitting room off the main hall. The space was decorated in soft creams and golds, with a writing desk near the window. Diane sat and gestured to a chair. I'll be direct, she said. This engagement. It's important to Elliot's standing with the family. There's a trust fund at stake, a seat on the board. His father doesn't think he's serious enough. This, she gestured vaguely at Caroline, helps. Caroline said nothing. I don't need you to love him, Diane continued. I just need you to look like you do. Can you do that? Yes. Good. Diane opened a drawer and pulled out a stack of glossy invitations. These are events you'll attend, galas, luncheons, fundraisers. I'll have my assistant send you the details. You'll need appropriate clothing. I'll arrange for a stylist. Thank you. Diane's smile was thin. You're welcome. Now, the hospital benefit. I need someone to organize the seating chart. It's tedious, but necessary. Can I trust you with that? Caroline understood. This was the job, not fiancé, assistant. Of course, she said. That night, Caroline lay in the guest room Elliot had shown her to. It was larger than her entire apartment. The bed was a 4-poster draped in white linen. The windows overlooked the garden, where lanterns glowed softly in the dark. She opened her laptop. The Cross family's public holdings were easy to find. 3 LLCs, commercial real estate, residential developments, a portfolio of luxury rentals. Richard's name appeared on most of the filings, with James listed as COO. Elliot's name appeared nowhere. Caroline opened a second tab and pulled up the property records for the waterfront project James had mentioned at dinner. Riverside LLC. Permits pending. Environmental review in progress. She cross-referenced the LLC's address. It matched one of her own holdings. Caroline had spent the last 4 years quietly purchasing distressed properties through shell companies, renovating them and flipping or leasing them at a profit. It was slow, unglamorous work. No one noticed. That was the point. But 2 years ago, she'd bought a commercial lot near the waterfront, zoned mixed use, sitting vacant. She'd been waiting for the right project. The Cross family wanted to build condos on the adjacent lot, luxury units, waterfront views. They'd need her parcel to make the project viable. Caroline closed the laptop and stared at the ceiling. She smiled. The next morning, Caroline joined the family for breakfast. It was served on the terrace, where sunlight filtered through white pergola slats. Fresh fruit, pastries, coffee in delicate porcelain cups. Richard was already reading the paper. Diane sipped tea. James scrolled through his phone. Vanessa picked at a croissant. Elliot kissed Caroline's temple as she sat. "Sleep okay?" "Fine," she said. A server brought her coffee without asking how she took it. Richard folded his paper. "James, I need you to close the Riverside deal by end of quarter. We've already committed to the investors." "We're close," James said. "Just waiting on one last parcel. Small lot, privately held. Owner's been unresponsive." "Make them responsive," Richard said. "I'm working on it." Caroline added cream to her coffee, stirring slowly. Elliot leaned toward her. "Boring stuff, I know." She smiled. "I don't mind." Richard glanced at her. "You understand any of this, Caroline?" "A little," she said. "Real estate development, permits, zoning law." Richard raised an eyebrow. "You study law?" "I read a lot." Diane laughed lightly. "How diligent." James's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowned, and stood. "Excuse me, I need to take this." He walked inside, his voice already sharp as he answered. Caroline took a sip of her coffee and said nothing. That afternoon, Diane's assistant called Caroline into the library to review the seating chart for the hospital benefit. It was a massive event, 300 guests, each with specific social and financial considerations. Caroline spent 2 hours rearranging names on a digital mock-up, making sure donors sat near board members, rivals sat at opposite ends of the ballroom, and the Cross family's most important allies were positioned for maximum visibility. When she finished, Diane reviewed her work without comment. Then she handed Caroline another stack of papers. "Invitations," Diane said. "They need to be stuffed and addressed by hand. The calligrapher canceled." Caroline took the stack. It was over 200 envelopes. "Of course," she said. She worked at the desk in her room that evening, her handwriting careful and precise. The names were familiar: CEOs, philanthropists, city council members, people who moved through the world with the certainty that doors would open. She thought about doors, about who held the keys. The first gala was held at a museum downtown. Caroline wore a floor-length gown Diane's stylist had selected, midnight blue silk, tasteful but unremarkable. Elliot wore a tuxedo and a smile that he turned on and off like a switch. They arrived in a town car, and the moment they stepped onto the red carpet, photographers called Elliot's name. He waved. She stood beside him, silent. Inside, the museum had been transformed. String quartet in the corner. Champagne circulating on silver trays. Art on the walls that cost more than most people made in a lifetime. Elliot introduced her to people whose names she recognized from the seating chart. They smiled politely and forgot her immediately. "Elliot Cross," a man said, clapping Elliot on the shoulder. "Good to see you." "Senator," Elliot said smoothly. "You remember Caroline?" The senator's eyes flicked over her. "Of course. Lovely to meet you." He turned back to Elliot without waiting for her response. Caroline drifted to the edge of the room, near the bar, and ordered sparkling water. A woman in a red dress approached. "Vanessa." "You're doing well," Vanessa said, her tone pleasant but cold. "Very convincing." "Thank you," Caroline said. "Elliot's lucky to have someone so Accommodating. Caroline met her eyes. I think so too. Vanessa's smile tightened. Just remember, this is temporary. Don't get comfortable. She walked away before Caroline could respond. At dinner, Caroline was seated between a hedge fund manager and a philanthropist who spent the entire meal talking past her to each other. Elliot was 3 seats down, laughing at something James had said. Richard held court at the head of the table, telling a story about a development deal in the 80s that made everyone laugh except the people who'd lost money. Caroline ate her salmon in silence, listening. The hedge fund manager turned to her mid-conversation. "And what do you do, Caroline?" "I work in books," she said. "Oh, a writer? Retail." "Ah." He turned back to the philanthropist. "Anyway, as I was saying," Caroline set down her fork. She wasn't hungry anymore. After dinner, Richard gathered the family in a private sitting room off the main hall. Caroline followed Elliot inside, assuming she was meant to. Richard glanced at her, then at Elliot. "She can stay," Elliot said. Richard shrugged. James stood near the fireplace, arms crossed. Vanessa sat on the arm of his chair. Diane perched on the sofa, her posture perfect. "The Riverside Project," Richard began. "Where are we?" James exhaled. "Environmental review is moving. Permits are in progress. The only issue is the parcel I mentioned. Owners still won't sell." "Then offer more," Richard said. "I did, 3 times. They're not responding." "Find out who they are. Apply pressure." "I'm trying. The LLC is registered out of state. Shell company. It's hard to trace." Richard's jaw tightened. "I don't care how hard it is. We need that parcel, or the whole project collapses. Do whatever it takes." James nodded. Caroline sat very still. That night, back at the estate, Elliot poured himself a scotch in the library and sank into a chair. Caroline sat across from him, her shoes off, her feet tucked beneath her. "You were great tonight," he said. "I didn't do anything." "Exactly, that's the skill." He took a sip. "My family can be a lot." "They're protective of you." Elliot laughed. "They're protective of the money. I'm just the name attached to it." "Is that why you're doing this? The engagement?" "Part of it." He stared into his glass. "My grandfather set up the trust fund. I get full control when I'm 35, but only if I meet certain conditions. Marriage, stability, proof I'm not a disaster." "Are you a disaster?" "Sometimes." He looked at her. "You don't have to pretend to like me when we're alone." "I don't dislike you," Caroline said. "You're good at this, at being invisible." She didn't respond. "I mean it as a compliment," Elliot said. Caroline stood. "I'm going to bed." "Caroline." She turned. "Thank you," he said. "Really?" She nodded and left. The following week, Caroline returned to her apartment for the first time since moving into the estate. It was small, clean. She sat at her desk and opened her laptop. 3 new emails. The first was from her property manager. Rent collected on schedule for her 4 residential units. The second was from her accountant. Quarterly taxes filed. Clean. The third was from her lawyer. Cross Development LLC has made another offer on the waterfront parcel. $2.3 million. Advised response? Caroline typed her reply. Decline. No counteroffer. She hit send. Then she opened another tab and pulled up the environmental review for the Riverside project. The Cross family's permits were contingent on proving minimal environmental impact. But the site sat on reclaimed wetland. Delicate ecosystem. Strict regulations. Caroline had done her homework years ago. She knew exactly what those regulations were. She began typing an email to the state environmental agency, flagging several potential violations in the Cross family's initial filing. She cited specific statutes, attached relevant documents, signed it with her LLC's name. Anonymous, factual, devastating. She hit send. Then she closed the laptop and went to bed. The next family dinner was tense. Richard barely spoke. James's phone kept buzzing, and he kept leaving the table to take calls. Vanessa watched Caroline with narrowed eyes, as if she suspected something but couldn't name it. Elliot leaned close to Caroline. They got a letter from the EPA, environmental violations. Someone reported them. That's unfortunate, Caroline said. It could kill the whole project. I'm sorry to hear that. Elliot studied her face, but she gave him nothing. After dinner, Diane pulled Caroline aside in the hallway. I need you to do something for me, Diane said. Of course. There's a luncheon tomorrow, Junior League. You'll accompany me. All right. Diane's expression softened, just slightly. You've been very helpful, Caroline. More than I expected. I'm glad. But don't forget, Diane said, her voice dropping. This arrangement has an expiration date. Elliot will move on. You'll move on. It's cleaner that way. I understand, Caroline said. Diane smiled. Good. The Junior League luncheon was held in a private dining room at a country club. 20 women, all dressed in pastels and pearls, sipping white wine and picking at salads. Caroline sat beside Diane, who introduced her as Elliot's fiancée with a practiced smile. The women smiled back. One of them, a woman named Margaret, leaned across the table. So, Caroline, tell us, how did you two meet? Caroline recited the story. Gallery, Rothko, love at first sight. How romantic, Margaret said, though her tone suggested otherwise. Another woman, younger, with a sharp bob and sharper eyes, spoke up. And you're in retail? Books, Caroline said. Oh. The woman's smile was thin. That must be fulfilling. Diane touched Caroline's hand. Caroline's been invaluable. She organized the entire seating chart for the hospital benefit. How industrious, Margaret said. The conversation moved on. Caroline ate her salad and said nothing. That evening, Caroline returned to the estate to find Elliot in the library, pacing. They're auditing us, he said without preamble. Caroline set down her purse. Who? The EPA, the city. Someone filed a complaint. Now they're going through everything. Every permit, every filing, every inch of that project. Will it hold up? Elliot stopped pacing. I don't know. James says there are some discrepancies. Things that were overlooked. Corners that were cut. What kind of corners? Environmental stuff, wetland protections, maybe some zoning issues. He ran a hand through his hair. If this goes south, it's not just the project. It's the family's reputation. I'm sorry, Caroline said. Elliot looked at her. You don't seem surprised. I'm not involved in your family's business. I know, it's just... He shook his head. Never mind. I'm paranoid. Caroline said nothing. The audit took 2 weeks. During that time, the estate became a fortress of tension. Richard stopped eating dinner with the family. James was on the phone constantly, his voice sharp and strained. Diane moved through the house like a ghost, her smiles thinner each day. Vanessa cornered Caroline in the hallway one afternoon. This is your fault, she said. Caroline blinked. Excuse me? The audit, the complaints. It started after you showed up. I had nothing to do with it. Vanessa stepped closer. I don't believe you. That's your choice, Caroline said evenly. You think you're clever, Vanessa said, but you're nothing. You'll leave here with your little paycheck and disappear. We'll forget you existed. Caroline met her eyes. Maybe. Vanessa's jaw tightened. She walked away without another word. That night, Caroline couldn't sleep. She sat in the guest room with her laptop, scrolling through the audit findings. They were public record now, filed with the city. 12 violations, environmental, zoning, permit irregularities. The project was dead, and the fallout was spreading. Investors were pulling out. The city was threatening fines. The family's name, once synonymous with success, was now attached to scandal. Caroline closed the laptop. She thought about leaving, packing her bag, disappearing. But not yet. The next morning, Richard called a family meeting in the study. Caroline wasn't invited, but she heard the shouting from down the hall. "You said you had it under control." Richard's voice, sharp and furious. "I did! Someone sabotaged us." James, defensive. Who? Who would even know enough to? Silence. Then Diane's voice, quieter. "Could it be her?" Caroline's chest tightened. Elliot spoke up. "Caroline? That's insane. She doesn't know anything about this." "She's been here for months," Vanessa said. "She's been watching, listening." "She works in a bookstore," Elliot said. "Does she?" James's voice, cold, suspicious. Caroline stood and walked down the hall. She knocked once and opened the door. 5 faces turned toward her. "I heard my name," she said. Richard stood. "Caroline, do you know anything about the complaints filed against our Riverside project?" "No," she said. "Do you know anything about real estate law? Environmental regulations?" "I know how to read." James stepped forward. "You've been asking questions, watching. What are you really doing here?" Caroline looked at Elliot. He looked back, uncertain. "I'm here because Elliot asked me to be," she said. "And you just happened to show up right before everything fell apart," Vanessa said. "Correlation isn't causation," Caroline replied. Richard's eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" Caroline didn't answer immediately. She looked at each of them in turn. Richard, Diane, James, Vanessa, Elliot. Then she spoke. "I'm the person who owns the parcel you've been trying to buy." Silence. Elliot's face went pale. "What?" "The waterfront lot. The one blocking your project. It's mine. Has been for 2 years." James stared. "That's impossible." "It's public record. You just didn't look closely enough." Richard's jaw clenched. "Why didn't you say anything?" "You didn't ask." Diane's voice was icy. "You've been sabotaging us." "No," Caroline said. "I reported violations that were already there. I didn't create them. You did." Vanessa's voice shook with fury. "You lied to us." "I never lied. You assumed. There's a difference." Elliot stood. "Caroline, what the hell?" "I came here to do a job," Caroline said, her voice calm. "You paid me to play a role. I played it, but I didn't sign away my rights. I didn't agree to be a fool." Richard stepped forward. "You'll sell that parcel. Name your price." "I already declined your offers." "I'll double it." "No." "Triple it." "No." Richard's face darkened. "Then I'll bury you. I'll tie you up in court for years. I'll make sure you never work in this city again." Caroline met his eyes. "You're welcome to try, but I'd advise against it." "Why?" "Because I know where the other bodies are buried." The room was silent. James spoke first. "What does that mean?" Caroline reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. She set it on the table. "Your environmental violations weren't the only issues," she said. "I found 12 other properties in your portfolio with similar problems. Zoning irregularities, permit fraud, unpaid fines that were quietly settled with city officials who've since left office." Richard's face went white. "I also found 3 LLCs tied to your family that haven't filed proper disclosures in 5 years. That's federal, IRS territory." Diane sank into a chair. Caroline continued, her voice steady. "I haven't reported any of that. Yet. But if you come after me, I will. And unlike the EPA complaint, these won't be anonymous. I'll attach my name, my lawyers, my documentation." James's voice was barely a whisper. "Why?" "Because you treated me like I was nothing," Caroline said. "And I'm not." She turned to Elliot. "I'm sorry, I didn't want to hurt you, but I wasn't going to let them erase me either." Elliot said nothing. Caroline picked up her bag. "I'll be out by morning." She walked to the door, paused, and looked back. For what it's worth, she said. The role was easy. The invisibility was the hard part. Then she left. Caroline packed her things that night. One bag. The same bag she'd arrived with. She folded the dresses the stylist had bought, left them on the bed, took only what was hers. Elliot knocked on the door just after midnight. She opened it. He stood in the hallway, still dressed, his tie loose. His eyes were red. Was any of it real? He asked. The engagement? No. Us, talking, the nights in the library. Caroline hesitated. I didn't hate you. That's not the same. I know. Elliot leaned against the doorframe. They're going to fight you. You know that. I know. They'll make it ugly. I'm ready. He looked at her for a long moment. You're not who I thought you were. Neither are you, Caroline said gently. Elliot nodded. Then he turned and walked away. The next morning, Caroline left the estate before sunrise. She took an Uber to her apartment, climbed the stairs, and unlocked the door. Inside, everything was exactly as she'd left it. Small, quiet, hers. She made coffee and sat at her desk. Her phone buzzed. A text from her lawyer. Cross Development filed an injunction, trying to freeze your assets. We'll handle it. Caroline texted back, thank you. Another text. Also, Richard Cross called me directly. Threatened to sue. I told him to get in line. Caroline smiled. Over the next 2 weeks, the Cross family launched a full assault. They filed lawsuits. They called in favors from judges and politicians. They hired investigators to dig into Caroline's past, looking for anything they could use against her. They found nothing, because Caroline had been careful. Every property she owned was documented, every tax return filed, every contract clean. Meanwhile, the environmental audit expanded. The EPA handed off findings to the IRS. The IRS handed off findings to the state attorney general. The Riverside project was officially dead. 3 other Cross projects were frozen pending review. Investors began pulling out. Banks started calling in loans. The empire Richard had spent 40 years building was cracking. James called Caroline on a Thursday afternoon. She didn't answer. He left a voicemail. You win, okay? You win. Just tell me what you want. Money? We'll pay. The parcel? Keep it. Just make this stop. Caroline deleted the message. Diane sent a handwritten letter. It arrived in a cream envelope, her initials embossed on the flap. Dear Caroline, I underestimated you. That was my mistake. I hope you understand that nothing we did was personal. This is simply how our world works. If there's any way to resolve this amicably, I hope you'll consider it. Regards, Diane. Caroline read the letter twice. Then she folded it and placed it in a drawer. She didn't respond. Vanessa showed up at Caroline's apartment unannounced. She buzzed the intercom, her voice sharp. I know you're up there. Let me in. Caroline didn't answer. Vanessa buzzed again. Fine, I'll wait. Caroline watched from the window as Vanessa stood on the sidewalk for 20 minutes, arms crossed, glaring up at the building. Eventually, she left. The final blow came from an unexpected place. One of the city officials Richard had quietly paid off years ago, someone who'd taken money to expedite permits and ignore violations, came forward voluntarily. He gave a full statement to the Attorney General, detailing every transaction, every favor, every dollar. He named names, Richards, James's, 2 city councilmen, a zoning board member. The story broke on a Tuesday morning. Front page. By noon, Richard and James were under investigation. By the end of the week, Richard had stepped down as CEO. Elliot called Caroline one last time. She answered. It's over, he said. My father's out. James is lawyering up. The board's talking about dissolving the company. I'm sorry, Caroline said. Are you? She didn't answer. I get it, Elliot said. I do. They treated you like dirt. You had every right. But they're my family, and now they're ruined. They ruined themselves, Caroline said. I just turned on the lights. Elliot exhaled. I wanted to tell you, the trust fund. I'm not getting it. The conditions included upstanding moral character. Turns out being engaged to someone under false pretenses doesn't qualify. I'm sorry, Caroline said again. Don't be. I don't want it anymore. What will you do? I don't know. Maybe something real for once. Caroline smiled. Good luck, Elliot. You too, Caroline. He hung up. The lawsuits against Caroline were dropped one by one. The Cross family didn't have the money or the leverage to keep fighting. Their legal team quietly withdrew. The investigations continued. Fines were levied. Settlements were reached. Richard lost his seat on 3 corporate boards. James took a plea deal to avoid jail time. The Cross name, once golden, became a cautionary tale. 3 months later, Caroline stood on the waterfront parcel she'd owned for years. The land stretched out before her, empty, waiting. She'd finally decided what to do with it. Not luxury condos, affordable housing, mixed use, community-focused. She'd already secured the funding, the permits, the approvals. The groundbreaking was scheduled for spring. Caroline returned to her apartment that evening and found a package waiting at her door. No return address. She brought it inside and opened it carefully. Inside was a single photograph, a candid shot from the museum gala months ago. Caroline stood at the edge of the room, holding a glass of sparkling water, her expression neutral. On the back, someone had written in blue ink, "You were always watching." It wasn't signed, but Caroline recognized the handwriting. Elliot. She set the photograph on her desk and smiled. A week later, Caroline received an email from a reporter asking for an interview. She declined. Another email came from a podcast producer. Declined. A third from a documentary filmmaker. Declined. She didn't want to be the story. She wanted to disappear again.